Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So, what is the biggest conspiracy in the past couple of decades? I would probably say in a lot of ways it's who killed Kennedy. And there's been a lot of people that tried to expose who really killed Kennedy. I think that you probably know that it was the CIA, the alphabet agencies, which is ultimately the extension of the deep state. But one of the questions that arises is, as we're entering into a time period where a lot of these conspiracy theories, whether it was Kennedy or 9/11 or HIV or any of the number of conspiracies that have existed, I think these days most people know the truth. And this begs the question, because if we go back, say, 10, 15 years ago in this war against these elites, we would have thought that, okay, let's get enough people around the world to know the truth, and that's going to be a major turning point in this battle. But I feel like, and maybe you're the same, that now so many people are aware of the truth. They're aware of this plan. They're aware of the depopulation agenda. But what next? And the question I have is, do the elites, have they planned it so that they want us to actually understand these plans and just be too paralyzed to act? And so joining me today to have a really just frank and honest discussion about this is author Jack Roth, who I've had on before, and who wrote the book literally called Killing Kennedy. Is someone who's been fighting to expose one of the greatest conspiracies and one of the greatest cover-ups. And I'm going to ask him this question. I mean, look, now that I think most people probably would say that, yeah, the government probably killed Kennedy, what do we do? How can we get people not only to know and understand what's happening with our world and what's happening in this war against us, but also to do something? So folks, enjoy this interview with author Jack Roth. Jack, it's great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Seth, thank you so much for having me back again. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So last time, we talked a lot about the death of Kennedy and the murder of Kennedy, which is really, I'll pull your book up just so it helps frame the discussion. So you wrote the book Killing Kennedy, where you've gone heavily into really exposing what I think has now become more just common knowledge, that it wasn't some random lone gunner that pulled off this assassination, and nor was it just a lone operation within an alphabet agency, but actually that it was a coordinated attack by the elites, by the deep state on in wiping out a president, but also it sent this psychological shock into especially the American psyche that I think has damaged us and created this way of further controlling us. But we got into a lot of other interesting things. So today there's one thing that we can touch on to frame the conversation, but then I want to dive right back into this discussion, kind of continue from last time. So as you had mentioned before we started up here, that there's a new book that is just coming out that was written by a former Secret Service agent, Paul Landis, who was silent for about 60 years, and saying that he found a bullet in Kennedy's limo. And this is Vanity Fair covering it, which is interesting. I guess that, they have to cover these things because they can't hide it when the Secret Service agent comes out and says this. But they're saying here that a new JFK assassination revelation could upend the long-held lone gunman theory. So let's just start here. Am I correct in understanding that this guy found a bullet casing in the limo? So would that mean that a bullet was fired from within the limo? I mean, what's going on here?
So, yeah. And again, the book comes out in October.
Okay.
And they're coming out with pre-release stuff that's fascinating. So no one knows the details yet, all of the details of what he's saying. But if he found a bullet casing or some kind of a bullet fragment or something like that in the back seat, this is what that comes down to. So first of all, it's Paul Landis. He's a Secret Service agent. He was right there. Apparently it took him, he had PTSD for quite a while after this. He retired, he left the Secret Service. And I read a little snippet that said it took him 50 years to even read anything on the assassination. Think about that. Like, that's intense. And people don't understand the collateral damage, that post-traumatic stress, right? So anyway, he's coming out now. It's perfect timing, 60th anniversary. But here's why that's so important. The Warren Commission had to establish that there were 3 shots fired that day, only 3, because there's no way Oswald could have gotten more than 3 shots off with his Manico Carcano in the 6th floor depository window. So they came up with this crazy magic bullet theory. And, that said that the shot came in, it hit Kennedy, it made a U-turn, it swirled around, it hit Connolly in the wrist, it then hit him in the thigh. So they came up with this ridiculous, utter nonsense that was the magic bullet. So 1 bullet did all that. And because they already had 2 more bullets accounted for. So they had to make it 3. And a lot of people that do the heavy research on this, they'll tell you that there were people in suits, whether they were CIA, Secret Service, NSA, whatever, they were walking around afterwards picking up stuff. They were making sure. And if anyone saw or said, hey, there's something here, there's something there, they confiscated it. So they did a really good job of 3 bullets. That means that Oswald is the lone assassin. If there's more than 3 bullets fired, he's not. Now, that's a big deal. That means it's a conspiracy, and that means that there were more than one shooter. And so what he's saying is, when he got to the hospital, so you have all this chaos going on. You have Jackie holding on to John, not letting go. She's a mess, obviously, as you can imagine. So they finally pry her off of John, get him into the hospital, get her out of the limo. And apparently that's when he sees this, either a bullet shell, bullet fragment, something lying up against the back seat. And he took it, and again, according to the things that are coming out on the book, took it, put it in his pocket, and then when he got into the hospital room, put it on a white towel or something and left it there. And of course, there's all this chaos going on, and he never said anything about it again. And now, finally, right, 60 years later, he's 90 years old, and he's like, there was a bullet there. But it's so significant. It doesn't seem like much. But again, if there was a fragment or a casing or something, that means there were more than 3 bullets, more than 3 shots fired. And that upends everything, like the headline says in Vanity Fair. So, now all this, again, coming out, here we are, the 60th anniversaries in November. So this is significant.
And do you think, I mean, it seems like, just with where we're at right now, that, like recently my wife and I watched the movie American Made, right, which was Tom Cruise, and it shows that he was actually working for the CIA, running guns and running drugs, and Bill Clinton was in the movie and George Bush was in the movie, and it just seems like that we're getting to a place where so many conspiracy theories have just come out and they've proved to be true, and you even have that Hollywood producing films and showing, the CIA was running drugs and running guns and assassinating people and doing all this crazy stuff. It almost seems like we've become numb to this to a certain degree. Look, we just passed the anniversary of 9/11, and half of my Twitter feed, which was like, not conspiracy people, these were mainstream folks, are talking about Building 7. They're talking about, people, the firemen saying they heard explosives. They're warning about bombs. So, the Kennedy assassination, like, I think, Dave, you and I did an interview 10 years ago, and it was like unveiling the smoking gun that reveals that Kennedy was actually not killed by Oswald. It probably would have been either A, like heavily censored, or B, like a blockbuster interview. But I feel like that nowadays, it's like that saying that, it's kind of everyone's passing around, which is like, what is it? The difference between a conspiracy theory and what is it? It's basically kind of saying that after 6 months, like, every conspiracy theory is true, right? That just keeps coming true. So, I mean, do you think that even with this information coming out now, and say this guy comes out and it proves, is it going to change anything? Like, is it going to cause this mass awakening in the public, or is it just going to be another one of those things that people are like, yep, I knew that, and I'm now right? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's almost, the satisfaction comes individually almost. We're saying, hey, I was right. I told you all along at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? Like, see, I told you, mom and dad. It was a conspiracy all along. And that's where it ends, right? And but yeah, you're right. It's sad because you're absolutely right. I think over the years, if you go through the last 70, 80 years, you have some of these conspiracy theories that have now, you know what, that was real. That wasn't a theory. MK Ultra, fact.
Hey, folks, I've got a quick message for you. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, myself included, talking about the importance of buying precious metals, gold and silver. But what's really behind that? Is just a thing of, hey, buy this gold, buy this silver, right? Or is there something deeper that we should be looking at? So I recently came across some figures about house prices. So in 1930, the average family home was approximately $4,000. Fast forward to 2023, the average family home is just over $400,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because things have just gotten more expensive? No, it's actually because the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1930, right? When people talk about the collapse of the dollar or inflation, this is what it means. Now, let's take a look at gold. So in 1930, if you wanted to purchase your home in gold, it would take approximately 200 gold coins. So 200 gold coins would purchase the average family home in 1930, about $4,000. Now, if you, instead of buying a home with that gold or cash, you set those aside, if you set aside $4,000 in cash in 1930, it would be worth $4,000 today. What can you buy with $4,000? Can you buy a family home? No, you can't even buy a crappy used car. But if you set aside $4,000 worth of gold coins in 1930, which is 200 gold coins, 1 ounce coins, that would be worth approximately $400,000 today. And this is the key lesson about precious metals. It's not about getting rich. It's about putting your money into an asset that protects you against inflation and against the destruction of the currency, which is what happens to all fiat currencies, especially now we're in the end days of the dollar. And so that's why it's important, maybe not all of your money, but a portion of your money, a portion of what you have, I highly recommend putting it into precious metals of gold and silver, because what it's doing is it's protecting you. This is an asset that has stood the test of time, not just stood the test of time since the 1930s. We're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. Gold was used to buy houses back in ancient Rome. It's still around. It's an asset that will forever have its value. So folks, if you want to do this and you need someone that you can trust, there's no person I can recommend more than Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a strong Christian patriot, and he's out to really help people to protect their savings and what you've worked for against the destruction of the dollar, not to mention also protecting it against the dangers of central bank digital currencies. So to learn more about this, go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 720-605-3900. Both those places will allow you to set up a quick appointment where you can talk to a wealth advisor that will help get you started on this path. Again, goldwithseth.com, 720-605-3900.
You know what? That was real. That wasn't a theory. MK Ultra, fact. Operation Mockingbird, fact. Operation Northwoods, pretty much a fact. Now we're getting into the whole area of Oswald as a CIA asset, as an intelligence agent. Kind of a fact. I mean, if you really put this into a court of law and said, we're going to prove this, if you were debating, you would absolutely win that debate. But I also think one of the things, the world has changed a lot, right? And there's so many distractions now. I think in 1963, people were like tuned into that. So they were either listening to Walter Cronkite, right, and reading the New York Times or the Washington Post, and that's what they were like, what happened here? So that's why they had to cover it up so much. That's why I was like, we have to make sure, right? Operation Mockingbird, all the newspapers are covered. They're going to say what we want them to say. So there was this whole thing where the Warren Commission just had to be looked at as revered bunch of people in a committee that was doing the right thing. Nowadays, people are so distracted, and I think subconsciously and psychologically, they're so fed up and they know what's happening but I feel most people feel they're helpless. So like if all of a sudden we find out that, oh yeah, the CIA, and this is another fact at this point, was running drugs, running guns. This is the way they funded a lot of their operations. A lot of the guys that say, oh, they finally got this, cartel guy. Yeah, but that cartel guy for years was working for the CIA. And then the CIA vilifies him when that comes at that point in time, and then he's the bad guy. Well, the CIA used him for years. This Bin Laden was the same thing. So now I think we're hearing this over and over, but we get numb to it. And then we're so distracted by other things, including, paying our bills, right? It's harder and harder to make a living. Only the top something percent are making enough money to be comfortable. So everyone's so, and a lot of people would rather talk about the movie Barbie than actually talk about things that really matter to the country, because it's escapism. I get it. I'm not making fun of that. I'm just saying it's true. It is. Or they're more worried. They'd rather think about the Kardashians or, all the athlete stars that make $8 trillion a week, right? And be like, ooh, how cool is that? Than actually try to make the country a better place. I mean, this is a really important thing you bring up. So at this point, yeah, we know, I think we know as objective critical thinkers, yeah, the CIA was involved in a lot of really nasty things over the years, and they probably did have something to do with killing JFK. Oh, yeah, and Oswald probably was a patsy. Who cares? That's the problem we're dealing with now. It's not even a question. They probably don't care much this guy came out with the book. If it was 50 years ago when he came out with the book, they would have killed him. And they would have ruined his life. They would have made sure that he was smeared in a major way. They probably still will to an extent. But that's what we're dealing with now, Seth. And I think that's the sad part. It's like people like you and I could do what we do, write a book, have a podcast, do the best we can. But how many people, what percentage of people actually care?
And it's such an important topic, because let's just go back, say 10 years ago, because I think that in the last, say 5 years, especially with COVID, that a lot of people really, really woke up. And when I talk to people, when I'm out speaking and doing events, and I asked them, what was your moment? It was usually one of two things. It was either 9/11 or it was COVID. And it was one of those two things that say, yeah, that was when something didn't seem right. And I started researching. Then I discovered all this stuff, right? And so let's go back 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I think it would have been easy to believe that, okay, for the people that understand the reality of where we're at in the world and the battle against the elites and their agendas for depopulation and, Agenda 21, 2030, et cetera, it would have been easy to think that, okay, if we can just get enough people around the world to understand, to break out of that matrix and understand the truth about that there's actually a war waging against us, then that will be enough to then have the momentum for the people to overthrow these people. But I feel like that the elites also know that, and that maybe their strategy is to, like what Yuri Bezmenov said, to normalize people so much that you can show them the facts and they won't even know it, right? So to get to a point where our society is one where people might even actually know that this is going on, and you could even say, look, here's absolute proof, hypothetically, that they're going to put your kids in a FEMA camp in the next 5 years. And that even if people knew that and knew it was true, that they would actually not do anything. Because isn't that the ultimate control? Is that if you can remove the cage from the animal and the animal just sits there and doesn't do anything. And maybe that's what their goal is. So it doesn't matter how much Alex Jones is exposed. It doesn't matter that people know this, is that they know that most people would rather stare at their phones or stare at Netflix or watch their football game than actually fight to protect the futures of their children and their grandchildren.
Right. It's psyops, right? It's the idea that these entities, CIA, FBI, NSA, deep state stuff, right? Even more deep state. They understand human nature and they understand human psychology. This is the key to everything. And that is what people don't it's almost like it's incapable of understanding that because of human psychology, right? So you had in World War II in the 1920s and 30s in Germany leading up to what happened, people like Joseph Goebbels and that Nazi propaganda machine, they understood that, right? They understood exactly what people were going to do. Create a scapegoat. They're suffering. People are suffering, right? They're poor. They can't get food. They're humiliated after World War I. We're going to build Germany up again. So people get amped up, right? And then give them a scapegoat. Jews, communists, they're the bad guys. And then just go, right? And then do the rhetoric over and over again. When people in Germany, right? When you said people were going to FEMA camps and no one here cares, and they were sending people to concentration camps, and they either denial, knew it, denial. There was a lot of that. I'm not even looking that way. Germany's stronger now. We just defeated Poland. We just defeated Czechoslovakia. Woohoo, I'm German. It's nationalism, right? So they get all amped up about that, and they don't want to think, cognitive dissonance. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but it's cognitive dissonance. They don't want to think of that their government or country is capable of such things. So they're going to live in their little bubble and be like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the grocery store today. There's bread now and there's meat. My family's fed. We're okay. We're not Jewish. We're not communist. So unless you're being taken to a FEMA camp, what do you care? Right? Like there are people that do care. And these are like the intellectuals and stuff. Who were the first people that the Nazis got rid of? It was the intellectuals. The gypsies weren't first. The Jews weren't first. It was the intellectuals in the country who were like, wait a minute, that's wrong. Right? They got rid of all those professors, university professors, right? And people who were, open-minded free thinkers. They had to get rid of them first. And then there was no opposition. The Khmer Rouge did the same thing in Cambodia. Anyone who was educated, dead. They looked at your hands. If you had farmer's hands, you're good. You're a worker. But if you had soft hands, you were a writer or an intellectual, boom, they put that plastic thing around your head, the killing fields. This is modus operandi.
It's like in China, under the CCP, they had the 100 Flowers campaign, which, I mean, this to me is the prime example. Where they actually invited all of the intellectuals. They basically came out and said, look, we want your advice on how we can better run this country. And of course it was communist. So there's a lot of people saying, yeah, like there's a lot you could do so we're not all starving to death. And so they opened up this large forum to allow all of the people that had ideas about how to better run the government to come out and talk and give ideas. Just about every single person that came out, they ended up killing them. And it was their way. It was just, trapping someone with honey, right? This was how they got rid of anybody that was going to be thinking independently. And this is what worries me, because as we're in this time right now, we're trying so hard to get this information out. And especially now that we have Twitter, which is an extremely mainstream venue, which has now for the most part become uncensored, so we can talk about this. You can share information. Like I said, I saw so many videos of Building 7 falling, on 9/11 on Twitter. This stuff is now, it's right out in the open. So how do you think, though, we can overcome this? Like, how do you think we can we'll talk about this, the American people, because that's where you and I both are. How can we get the American people to care enough about this that they're going to actually do something? That, to me, that's the $1 million question. It's not about getting them to see the truth. It's about getting them to actually take action. What's that look like?
Yeah. And, people ask me this, and I want to go at the end of interviews, it's funny because people are like, so what do we, you want a positive ending to this? Like there's hope, right? But all we have to do, Seth, is keep doing what we're doing and everything's going to work out okay. And people are going to know. And once they know, everything's going to change. But knowing's not enough, right? Knowing, it's caring. And then there's a thing called political will. So we have to elect leaders. Our system is broken to the point where everyone in Congress basically is bought and paid for by special interests. And guess what? These special interests are incredibly wealthy, elitist individuals and organizations. They want things to remain the way they are, right? So they're like, what? And that's why I say I try to get away from Republican Democrats so much, because that's part of what they do. It's like, fight each other, right? Divide and conquer. And yeah, there are differences in philosophy there, but like, it's never been as bad as it is now. So like, we're ready to kill each other over stuff, right? We hate each other. So if we're focused on this, how can we focus on the fact that the pharmaceutical lobby, right, is ensuring that nothing changes, and that they're making billions and billions of dollars at the cost of people's health and healthcare, and people that can't afford these pills and can't afford all this, and the doctors are in on it because the doctors are making money on it. So everyone has to take a look in the mirror and say, what kind of human being am I going to be? I'm not going to play that game. And for the for the masses, for the regular citizens that have 9-to-5 jobs, they can vote. But if the system is broken at that level, who are they voting for? Do they really have our interest in mind? No, they don't. Because they just want status quo. This is what we need to make, billions of dollars on war, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, education, things that, by the way, really in a democratic society should not be run the way they are. I mean, healthcare should not be something that is privatized to that extent where only the wealthy are actually benefit from that. Or education, where only the wealthy benefit from the way our education system is set up. We are a democracy, and within a democracy, there are social constructs, right? In order to have a society that works, certain things, especially one as big as ours, certain things have to work a certain way in order for we the people, to have even a chance of prospering. So right now, the system is rigged to the point where, as long as the political system is broken, what are we going to do? I go back to the Civil War. You say, well, what would it really take? I feel like with countries and nations and stuff, every so often there's a bloodletting. And I hate to say this, but because people are like, that's morbid, that's terrible. The Civil War was a bloodletting, right? It was that moment in time where there was no other way to get past the things that we needed to get over, right? Unless there was this bloodletting. Leading up to the Civil War was the same thing. People were ready to strangle each other in the streets over slavery and all that. So you have this major bloodletting, 600,000 people die, an entire generation of men, right, of boys dead, right? World War I, kind of the same thing. And then the country kind of tries to move forward. And there was a lot in there because Lincoln was assassinated where it didn't move forward the way we really should have moved forward. So again, we carry that with us like a black cloud, right? Kennedy assassination, the truth isn't told, more of a black cloud, right? How do we really move forward? So yeah, I think, what divine intervention, ET intervention. I tell my wife all the time, I mean, man, at this point, unless the ETs come down and take care of these people, because what are we really going to be able to do? Yeah, vote, absolutely vote, but the system's got to be fair. The system can't be rigged.
And who's counting the votes?
Who's not only that, but who are you voting for? Like, that's the main thing. Like, if I have good intentions and I want to run for Senate, or let's say congressman, okay, I have all these good intentions, but by the time I'm elected, in order to get elected, I'm beholden to, I don't know, 2-3 dozen people. So now, because they gave me the money to win the election, because it costs so much. So all these special interests and people who already have power, have the money, give the money to buy politicians so they can make sure that the politicians do their bidding. I don't want to do the bidding of the pharmaceutical industry. I don't want to do the bidding of the the Exxon Mobil? I don't. But in order to get elected, I might have to. So, and they understand human nature, power, ego, right? Ego is the thing that drives us more than anything. So human beings, they know they're all ego. It's all about that, right? They want to get into office. They want to get into power, especially the people who would even think about doing it. So they understand. It's understanding human nature and understanding history that gets us to a point where we can say, how can then really start talking about how can we really change this? But can we change human nature? If everyone woke up tomorrow, Seth, and was like, I want to do what's best for everyone, and I'm going to live the rest of my life to do that, everything would change. Everything would change within months. It would all change. People aren't waking up that way because it's not human nature.
And well, the thing is that let's just say that was some part of what human nature was. It's been buried. It's been covered up so much, and not just in one generation. I mean, generation after generation after generation. And going back to to the Kennedy assassination, because I think this plays into this discussion actually in a very important way. There was a reason. I think we talked about this before. There was a reason why they did that in such a public and traumatic way, is because that generation of people, my parents that were alive. For me, it was 9/11. I was in grade school, and that was I remember exactly which class I was in and all that. And as a kid, I didn't understand like what's the World Trade Center. I thought it was some big building where all the countries are trading together, right? So, but right. for our parents' generation, which was a very important generation in it's like, how are they acting now, right? How is that generation acting now? Because I think in a lot of ways our country is the way it is now because of how people allowed themselves to act in the 60s and 70s, right? And if you go back into Tavistock and you go back into a lot of the communist stuff, you can see that the 60s and 70s were a significant role in changing the American culture from what it was in the 50s and 40s, right? And so what significance do you think the assassination played from an MK Ultra perspective, from a trauma-based control system? How did that, do you think, influence that generation of people? And then understanding it from that perspective, is there a way to figure out how to undo that somehow? How to, I think you kind of get the question I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely. It solidified their grip of power, right? So like, I'm thinking, if you think about it, they could have poisoned Kennedy. They could have had a plane crash. They could do those things. The CIA and all those, they were very capable, okay, of doing something like that. And yet here we are, right? It was almost like this, when you're in Dealey Plaza, when I was in Dealey Plaza, I'm like, God, it was almost like a sacrifice to the gods. It's like, here's this, it's so small. And it's like this, you can see the triangulation. You can see that once he made the turn, he was dead, like literally off of one street there was no way he was surviving. And they had so much, you could see, you can imagine 3 or 4 shooters with teams. Realistically, that's what you see, right? If you're objective, you see that happening. And it really was, it was almost like this, almost like if it was a secret society doing some initiation, right? Like this, that this is what this was. So it was a sign, because by doing it like that in the open with all these people seeing it, and you see the president's head being shot off, literally, where pieces of his brain are going all over his wife and the back seat of the car, and she's trying to pick up pieces of his brain, trying to climb the back seat. If that's not traumatic, I don't know what is. And you can see even a Secret Service guy had PTSD for decades. The people I talked to in the book that were kids who were there, PTSD their whole lives, where they were really messed up by seeing what they saw. So it sends a message to, I think, 2 types of messages. One is to the people that it's like, this can happen. It's a traumatic event. And for the individual, for citizens, they're looking for that who did it. And for them, it was easy to believe that it was this lone nut dude, Oswald, and let's get him. And people were rooting for Ruby when they shot him. They got rid of that guy. He's the guy who killed Kennedy. People get angry, but they want them to get angry at communists, right? Oswald was a communist sympathizer. But I really think the message was for anyone like the Kennedys who thought they were going to change things. Right? It's for anyone, and I think it was a real message to all the Kennedys. And I think that Bobby Kennedy was terrified, and he realized what was going on. But he's like, you know what? I'm going to continue to do what I'm going to do. And then what happens in '68? They kill him. They were going to get rid of anyone who threatened the status quo. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy. So when these other presidents take the oath of office, no matter what their campaign promises were, right? Like, you want the Vietnam War? I'm going to get, that's what Lyndon Johnson did, but he was a nut anyway, and he was fine with it. But he was going to sign whatever he needed to sign to get us into the Vietnam War big time. So companies like General Dynamics and Bell Helicopter and all these rich cats can get even richer because this war profiteering. Doesn't matter how many people die in the war. Who cares? They don't care. They're elitists. And that's how elitists think. They don't care about the masses. Let them die. It's better to reduce the population. It's too many people anyway. There's too many people we have to control. So if 1 million Vietnamese and 56,000 Americans die, and most of those are like from poor neighborhoods, in the Midwest, who cares? We don't care about those people. So I think the message was to people who were like, oh my God, these guys are serious. And I think the Kennedys were like, hey, we have power, man. You're the attorney general, Bobby. I'm the president. We're the Kennedys. We're going to change things. And that was great. But I think they realized, and again, the hard way, that they didn't have as much power as they thought they had. And that's why you see all the presidents after that. Have they really done anything? Right? Have they really, their campaign promises, it's almost like it's always status quo one way or the other. One might lower the deficit, one might get into war, but it's almost like this cyclical little Republican Democrat, but nothing really changes. Nothing really changes. Little things, they passed the Environmental Act. Okay. Or, they gave a tax break to the rich again. Oh my God. So those things happen. But what's the one constant? Was that the people in that power and that control, they still have the power and control.
All right, folks, I've got a quick message for you. I have one simple question. If today you could no longer go purchase more food for your family, with the food stores that you have in your home, how long would you be able to feed your family? Would it be a week, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year? This is a really important question, folks, that we have to be very realistic about, because the elites are proactively trying to put us into a state of food crisis and a state of famine. I'm sure you've seen all of the different food processing plants and farms that are blowing up. You've got cattle dying by the tens of thousands. They're proactively trying to collapse our food system because they know if they can control our food, they can control us. And so one of the best ways to be outside of their control is to be able to have our own stores of food and to be able to produce our own food. So there's really two things I would recommend. One is having heirloom seeds that you can grow your own food with, making sure that they're non-GMO heirloom seeds, that way you can harvest your seeds this year, use them next year. You can use these seeds for generations. Literally, that's how it will work. The other thing, though, is this high-quality storable food. This is food that's sitting somewhere. It's hidden in your basement, buried in your backyard, whatever it is. So that way, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, you might have 3 months set aside to get through that time period. And so for this, I would highly recommend a company called Heaven's Harvest. This is an amazing Christian-owned patriot company. And what they're doing is they're making high quality storable food. Again, a lot of the food companies, they say these food buckets, they're all about maximizing calories per dollar. They're filling the buckets with a bunch of filler and junk like sweet beverages, etc. But Heaven's Harvest, they focus on very high quality food that will last up to 25 years on the shelf. They also sell heirloom seeds. So you can buy all of your seeds, you can buy all of your storable food. And look, folks, personally, I would recommend having at least 3 months per person in your household, if not 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on your budget, but I would definitely make sure you have some seeds, because those seeds could be worth their weight in gold, if not more, in the future. So to go ahead and do this right now, go open up a new tab and go to heavensharvest.com. And if you use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So again, folks, the time is running out, and you'd rather be 3 months or 1 year early than 1 day late. Again, heavensharvest.com, and use promo code Seth to save 15% today. And one thing also about Kennedy is just hearing my mom talk about him. I mean, he was a loved president. I mean, it seemed like he was someone that, of course, you have two sides to the political coin, and there are some probably didn't like him because he didn't, wasn't their, kind of political ideology. But I mean, he was a national hero in many ways. I mean, he was handsome, he was charismatic, he was a good speaker. He inspired people. He's a family man, a beautiful wife, and so I think it was even deeper. But I think that it's interesting how you mentioned that that sends a signal to the presidents after that. I think up until about Trump, I think that Trump in a lot of ways, because as you mentioned, becoming say you're running for Congress, you have to buy it, you have to take all this money. Well, if you're a billionaire, you can just fund your own campaign, or you can, kind of bypass that. But it's like, in many ways, I think it was showing, hey, you're on a really tight leash if we allow you to be president. But I also think that there was this subconscious effect that it had on that generation of them kind of knowing that there's some other deeper, more sinister control, right? I think especially because think about it, who are the people that would most likely revolt against a tyrannical government? It's the people that probably said from day one, that's fishy, and I think it was maybe the CIA, right? It was those kinds of people. The people that were they bought it hook, line, and sinker. They're the ones that, fast forward, they're the ones that are watching CNN and wearing a mask and social distancing. And, they're not the threat to the establishment. The threat are the people that are questioning. And so for the people that question it just a little bit, what reality are they faced with? Wow, they just blew the head off of the president, like on primetime television, our most loved president. Like we're up against a very, very powerful entity here. And probably, I would imagine there's a good bit of those people that just say, I'm not going to go any further. This is a little bit too much for me.
Yeah. And that definitely scared people off. And 2 days later, they got rid of the patsy on live television.
Yeah. Gosh.
So Ruby shoots Oswald live TV. And so you're watching someone get shot in the stomach, like you're in the Vietnam War, basically. And you're like, what is going on? I guarantee you not one American didn't at least say that at that moment. Right? Like, what in the world is going on? So, but then of course, Ruby was he loved the Kennedy, he loved Jackie, he loved the Kennedys. It was all nonsense. He was mob. He was very linked to Oswald and all that was going on, both in Dallas and New Orleans. So, but people at the time are, oh my God, what in the world is happening here? But yeah, you see that. But then, so what does that say? I'm like, I always thought, and I'm sure you've had these thoughts. I'm going to do what I'm going to do with my show. All right. Or I'm going to write my books and do my documentaries. But I've had talks with my partners, and what's the line? That if we cross a certain line, we're dead. We've had this discussion. And it's like, never do anything against the pharmaceuticals. Like, there's a list of we can't go there. And there's this line. And it's a blurry line a little bit, but it's like, well, if I do that, I could be in big trouble one way or the other. They might not kill me, but they are going to discredit me one way or the other. They'll ruin me. So you try to do everything you can do, but in the end, they have way more power than we do. We only have the power if everyone, like we talked about, the masses, we're not going to put up with this anymore. All right. You are going to change the way our government works, and you're going to take money out of politics, first and foremost. You got to get rid of all these lobbyists, right? Then, I don't know how that works. I don't know how that changes, but, there are things that people can do, and then people say, well, marching doesn't do anything, a million man march, whatever it is, you can have people marching, but you can cause disruption to the point where, without going over a line, where you cause that disruption, that change can occur. But there's got to be we talk about political will, but there's got to be a human will. There's got to be a will of the people to say enough is enough. And I just don't have enough faith in humanity that that's going to happen. I hate to say that, Seth, but it's like, I don't see this happening. I don't know how it would happen. I don't know how that would work. But remember I said, it's almost like an individual feeling better. It's like, okay, you didn't get one over on me. I just wrote this book. So I feel good about it. Like, I feel like you didn't get one over on me. You're not fooling me, CIA. And I'm sure you're thinking, you didn't fool me, CIA. I'm too smart for that. So there's an individual little bit of feeling better of, I'm not one of those sheep. You didn't get it over on me. Not that I'm totally changing things. We're both trying to get the word out. We're trying to get people to understand. But in the end, is it almost more individual satisfaction of, you didn't get me. I think people knew that there was no way they were going to defeat the Nazis as an individual German. Let's go back to that, because it's a good analogy. There were intellectuals and students and people, so they knew they were going to die. If they said, I'm fighting against, this is wrong, and I can't, Hitler is ridiculous, and I'm going to fight against them. Well, they were in prison, they were tortured, they were killed. But maybe dying that way, if you know what's coming, it's like, think about what happened. How many people died? 70 million people in World War II altogether. It's a lot of people. And it's because of one man and his shenanigans and his cronies. But individually, there were people who fought it. Maybe they can live with themselves better. Maybe they're the people who hid Jews, right? And say, I'm putting them in the basement. And the wife's like, we can't, well, they'll kill us. I'm like, we're doing it, because we can't live with ourselves as human beings if we don't. So maybe we do that. And if enough people individually start doing that, and say, I'm not going to watch this, I'm not going to vote for that, I'm going to do this instead, right? Maybe that's the way to do it. But Seth, listen, I'm just throwing stuff out there against the wall, seeing what sticks. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know what works, what's going to ultimately work.
Yeah, I don't either. I do think that, for one, that what we're seeing, you look back at just what COVID did in the reaction and where people are at right now, and even the recent discussions about the pandemic coming back and the masks coming back, the, do not comply trending on Twitter. So many people, so many liberals putting videos out saying, I will not wear a mask. I will not go along with this. So I do that aspect of humanity does give me hope, just from the perspective of the fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, that it's like, you got me the first time, but I'm not going to go along with it. And, so I think that in many ways, it's really comes down to just not complying. Doing it peacefully, but doing it in a loud way where you just don't comply. And I remember back when the pandemic was here and they had all the mask, rules and everything. And for me, I saw that as a slippery slope. And I saw that as complying to the globalists, that I'm going to be a good person and comply to the globalist agenda. And I refused it. And so I'd go into grocery stores and, they'd say, the manager would be like, sir, you need a mask. I'd say, nah, or I'd be like, okay. And I just keep going. Right. And so even though I was sometimes the only person in the store not wearing a mask, or I'd tell them that my beard served as a mask. That was a fun one. I'd say, oh, my beard does that. And they give me this weird look. I just keep walking.
It traps all the COVID,
it does. Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. But when I would meet those other people that also weren't wearing one, you have this connection where it's like, hey, I nice smile. It's great to be on the same team. And that gives you something. And so I have a feeling that because we're entering into, I think, what could be potentially, especially entering into an election year, but I think we're entering into a new round of the elites trying to exert more control on the general population in an effort to get us closer into this system that they want us to be in, where they have complete control over us. But I do think that even though I wouldn't say I have a whole lot of hope that the vast majority of Americans are going to stand up and say, like, we're not going to comply with you elites, that enough of them just out of their own logic are saying, I'm not going to do that again. And, even 2 people out of 100 in a Whole Foods felt amazing. So imagine this time when you go in and say there's 100 people in the store and maybe 20 of them are refusing to wear a mask. I mean, how long can that last for? And so that's what does give me hope. 'Cause I think that really comes down to that. It doesn't come down to some, crazy strategy to overthrow the government or, storm the Capitol. I think it just comes down to enough people just saying no, just exerting their free will. And I think that is what we will see. I just hope that people are mentally and psychologically prepared enough for whatever might come, because I'm concerned that they're not just going to, attempt 2.0. There's a lot of other things that they've got in the works to try to break people's will and break their spirit and just get them to comply.
Without question. I mean, if 9/11, I look at that, and I never try to talk too much about that because I don't know, but I almost feel like it's not so much our government did it, but maybe that our government allowed it. Kind of like Pearl Harbor. It's like, okay, we need to get into this war, but public opinion, not good. So, but yeah, the Japanese, they're planning on attacking us. Let them do it. Or we'll put all the old battleships there, right, and the carriers. Right? People are going to die, but of course these elitists don't care about life, other people's lives. So they let it happen. I feel like that's what happened with 9/11. They let it happen. But what scares me about what they have is the technology. Like these technologies, certainly you're going to produce anything they can in a lab at this point. So if they want to produce COVID, there they go. They produce COVID. They can do a lot worse, right? So then you're thinking to yourself as a human being, self-preservation, right? If I don't wear a mask, I'm dead. Because I believe they caused this, but it's still out there. And I'm older. Maybe I have an underlying condition. Maybe I have asthma. I want to live, So I totally believe that this was made. COVID was man-made, right? But that doesn't change the fact that it exists. So if it exists, then if I'm older, what do? I'm risking my life if I do that. And if I'm young and I don't have any, so who cares? I think, like you have a different mentality anyway. But that's the problem. Like you said, they have so much nefarious stuff that they can get you on your knees no matter how much free will you have. So the only choice you have is either I'm going to do what they say or I'm going to die. Right. And they don't care if you die. So whether it's the Nazis putting bullets in people's head for not agreeing with them, or like what you saw in China, and you were showing that graphic, whatever, the Khmer Rouge, all of that. So they'll just kill you. They might not do that here because they have the technology now. Just say, well, it's coming. So if you don't, and then all the very wealthy, right, they're getting the best healthcare. They're probably getting inoculated with stuff that actually works. Right. And then they're also in their underground bunkers. So they're going to survive no matter what happens. We're the ones out in the streets that have to go to Whole Foods. Right. So we're like, I don't want to wear a mask. I got mad. Like I wore a mask the first time around. I was like, I don't know what's happening. I'll wear a mask. This time I was a little mad when I heard about that a couple of weeks ago. They're doing that again? No way. There's no way I'm wearing a mask. I'm done with that. So it gets agitating. It's like, well, what are you doing? What's going on here? And what it really is, all it's doing is making the pharmaceuticals billions and billions of more dollars. Guys like Fauci and all those clowns, they're just making more and more money. So, yeah, man, I hear you. And I love this conversation. I think this is great because this is the big picture stuff, right? You have the Kennedy assassination. You have these things happening. But why? Why? And what's the point? What's the purpose of all of it? That's what we got to get to.
Exactly. Well, Jack, I'll pull your website up one more time before we sign off of here. It's just jackrothauthor.com. I'll throw that link into the description. And just want to thank you for coming on the show. It's always it's a fun conversation. This is what I enjoy. Let's just say I had you over and we're sitting down for a beer. It would be this kind of conversation. What do we do about this? And what do you think? And it's helpful because I think that for a lot of people that are watching and listening, they can't sit at their dinner table and have this conversation. I imagine a lot of people they can't, or even lay in bed next to their spouse at night and have this conversation. So I think it's helpful for people to be able to sit in and in essence partake in these discussions, because we have to be having them, because if we don't have enough of these conversations, if we don't change things, we're going to end up like those Germans or like the Cambodians or like the Chinese. And we can't let that happen.
Cannot let that happen. Absolutely agree.
Well, Jack, thanks again. And I look forward to next time. Take care, man.
Hey, Seth, thanks again for having me on. I love our conversations. Thank you, man.
Absolutely.